Hello and welcome everyone. So yes, my name is Elena, and today we're going to talk about the Eurasian Technical Regulation 041/2017 and the Russian Substance Inventory. Here's the outline of today's presentation, and we are going to talk about the background and timeline. Then we're going to proceed with the Technical Regulation 041 and look more in detail into it. Then we're going to talk about the EAEU inventory and what that is, and also what is the Russian inventory and how that differs from the EAEU inventory. And finally, we are going to have a short summary on everything that we have talked about during this presentation. So, background and timeline. First, I would like to introduce you to the Eurasian Economic Union, also known as the EAEU. And please don't confront it with the European Union, because this is the Eurasian Economic Union, and it was formed in January 2015. There are different areas of cooperation in this union. However, one of them is the technical regulations of the union. And in 2017, the EAEU Commission has approved the Technical Regulation 041 on safety of chemical products that is now expected to enter into force 2nd of June 2021. However, the second year, also called the second part of this regulation, was supposed to be approved by December 2018, and this part would include clarifications on certain aspects of this regulation. However, due to disagreement between different nations that are part of the Eurasian Economic Union, this has now been postponed. And here I introduce you to the timeline. You can see that there are two different colors, blue and red. The blue one considers the technical regulation, and the red one is the Russian inventory. So starting with 2017, that is when the technical regulation on chemical product safety has been adopted by the EAEU Commission. In 2018, as said before, in December, there should have been an approval of the second part of the regulation that would include some clarifications on the regulation. However, it has been postponed and is still not approved. In 2019, Russia has opened its national inventory as a part of creating a common EAEU inventory, which is also a part of the technical regulation, that there should be a common inventory formed in the Union. And all other nations are supposed to do the same, and all of that should have happened in December 2018. We will look more into detail on that later. And in 2020, 1st of August, so in a bit than a month from now, the Russian inventory will close for nominations. And in 2021, 2nd of June, the Technical Regulation 041 is expected to be implemented on the whole territory of the Eurasian Union. So what is the Technical Regulation 041? Starting with the full name, the name is the Technical Regulation of Eurasian Economic Union on Safety of Chemical Products. But please pay attention, it is also called Eurasia REACH. But when you say Eurasia REACH, you mean the Technical Regulation on Safety of Chemical Products 041. Eurasia REACH is just a common name and a short version of this technical regulation. The technical regulation is valid for all EAEU countries, which includes Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia. You can see them on the map below. Also, the adaptation period of the current technical regulation is of 4 years, from 2017 until 2021. And as said before, by December, there should have been 2018, there should have been several things that should have been achieved between the countries. For example, clarifications on the second part of the regulation, appointment of responsible institutions for the regulation, and also national inventory formation in order to later on create a common inventory. This has now been moved to March 2021. However, the date might also change later. Now let's look at the content of the Technical Regulation 041. The chapters you see here that are underlined are going to be developed a bit more in this presentation. So we start with the application area, rules for the identification of chemical products and rules for the circulation of chemical products, then requirements for classification of chemical products, general safety requirements, requirements for labeling on chemicals and for precautionary labeling, and also for safety data sheets. Also, we're going to look into how to ensure compliance with the requirements, notification of new chemical substances, and conformity assessment to the requirements of this technical regulation. So, goals and application of the technical regulation 041. The two main goals are the following: to promote safety of human life and health, the environment, life and health of animals and plants, preventing actions that mislead consumers. And the second one is also to establish union requirements for chemical products in the circulation of the territory of the EAEU. And there are two application areas. In green box, you can see the inclusions, and in the red box, exemptions. Why it says that inclusions are approximate, that is because they are not really clearly defined in this technical regulation that we have right now, and more clarifications are supposed to come in the second part of the technical regulation that we're still waiting for. However, what we know now is that the inclusions are the following: organic synthetic products, acids, salts, and bases, inorganic synthetic products, substances for the production of plastic, rubber, polymers, synthetic fibers, agricultural products, plant protection products and herbicides, paints, household chemicals, and some other chemical products. Exemptions, however, are very clearly defined in this technical regulation, and you can find them in Appendix number 1 of this current technical regulation. This includes drugs for medical and veterinary medicines, minerals in a state of occurrence, perfumes and cosmetic products, chemical products that are a source of ionizing radiation, including their waste, food products, food additives, and nutritional supplements, products included in manufactured articles that do not change their chemical composition, waste products, and chemical products under transit through the Eurasian Economic Union. So starting straight with Chapter 3, of the technical regulation, since Chapter 1 was application area and Chapter 2 were basic concepts that we decided that were not necessary to mention here. So Chapter 3 is on rules for the identification of chemical products, and this chapter lists generalized information because there are country-specific national standards for chemical identification, which means that Russia might apply GOST standard and other countries might have different standards. However, GOST standard, in case you don't know, is a unified standard between former Soviet Union countries that many post-Soviet countries use and have as their national standard. So in this technical regulation, all the standards will be named GOST standards because all of the countries that apply this regulation will use these standards. However, the GOST standard is voluntarily applicable in EU countries. So for other regulations, it might be other standards, national standards that they use. However, for the identification of chemical products, there is a GOST standard named Identification of Chemical Products General Provisions. And some important rules named in this regulation are the following: the establishment of a chemical name according to UPAC and CAS number, determination of the mixture's chemical composition, also including identification of the main chemical and identification of potentially hazardous substances as part of impurities. Also establishing the presence of new chemical substances in chemical products in concentration than more than 0.1% per mass. Also assignment of chemicals to new chemicals, to chemical substances that are prohibited, or to chemicals that are restricted to use on the territory of the EAEU. And the last is the designation of the field of application. How are you going to use the chemical product? Chapter 4, rules for the circulation of chemical products on the market. So in order to put your chemical on the market on the territory of the EAEU, your chemical product needs to comply with the TR 041 and other regulations that might apply to it. Also, all chemicals need to be present in the register of chemicals and mixtures before they can be released into circulations on the territory of the Eurasian Union. Continuing with Chapter 5, what are the requirements for classification of chemical products? Classification of chemical products is carried out by the manufacturer or the only representative. Here it's called the person authorized by the manufacturer. I will use the word only representative, or, and the importer of such products. So classification is done by either of these three actors. Also, there are different standards that define the classification. The classification is not defined in the Technical Regulation 041. It is defined by different GOST standards. There are very many different GOST standards for classification. Here, I just mentioned two of them, just to show you that there are quite general standards. For example, the first GOST on hazard classification of chemical products, general requirements, but then there are very chemical specific standards. For example, classification of chemicals hazardous due to physical and chemical properties, and test method for pyrophoric liquids. And to the right, in the right corner, you can also see what the GOST document looks like. And continuing with general safety requirements, Chapter 6 of the Technical Regulation. This is to ensure safe circulation of chemical products on the territory of the EAEU. So in order to do that, the following requirements must be met. Compliance by the manufacturer or the OR or the importer of chemical products with the requirements of this technical regulation. Provide the intended use by the consumer of chemical products. Assessment of compliance with the current TR 041. The implementation of preventive measures when handling chemical products, and also informing the consumer about the dangerous properties and methods of safe disposal. Chapter 7 and 8 is about requirements for labeling and precautionary labeling of chemicals. What considers the labeling of chemical products? The names should be prepared and the labels should be prepared in Russian and include following information. So the name of the chemical product in Russian. Also, it is possible to include the brand name if there is any brand name. Contact details of the manufacturers and that of importer, and this includes telephone number, address, and the contact person. The name of the chemicals and mixtures classified as hazardous and containing the composition of chemical products in quantities exceeding the concentration specified in the standards. So this means that you need to check with the standard if it exceeds the concentration or not. There are storage conditions that should be mentioned on the labeling. The recipe of the chemical product, if there is any. So how has this chemical product been made? However, this is just if available. And information on the hazardous properties of chemicals, including warning marks. And then there's also precautionary labeling that is done in accordance with a certain GOST on precautionary labeling of chemical products. And continue with Chapter 9, requirements for the safety data sheet. The manufacturer, the OR, or the importer can compile a safety data sheet. And the requirements are indicated in GOST on safety data sheet of chemical products. This, to the right, you can see also what the safety data sheet in the Eurasian Economic Union looks like. On Chapter 10, we have ensuring compliance of chemical products with the requirements of the technical regulation. Here, everything is pretty simple. To become compliant with the regulation, the correct regulation requirements must be met. And also, Chapter 11, notification of new chemical substances. Notification of new chemical substances is carried out by entering the information about these chemical substances into the register of chemical substances and mixtures. To do so, you need to provide quite general information about your chemical substance. And Chapter 12, so let's look at the conformity process. There are namely two ways. Let's say if you're a manufacturer abroad and you are importing to the Eurasian Economic Union, or you have appointed an only representative, and then you decide to go through the inventory procedure and notify your chemicals to the inventory that is now open in Russia. you will be able to go through the notification registration later on, which requires less information when you will have to register your chemical. However, if by some reason you do not notify your chemical, or somebody else do not notify your chemical, because this works namely like that if your chemical is already presented in the inventory by some other company that has notified, then you don't have to notify it again. This means that your chemical is already there. However, if you do not notify and nobody else does this, this chemical will be considered as new and therefore potentially hazardous chemical for the market. Therefore, you will have to go through a laboratory investigation with your chemical, which may take longer time, and you will have to do a permissive registration process, which means that it's more time consuming and more documents need to be provided. However, there is still no information on penalties, whether what will happen if you do not notify to the inventory, or there are no dates and fees that are yet established about the notification registration, when the registration procedure will start. This is expected to be clarified in the second part of the regulation. So what about the competent authorities for this regulation? The main competent authority is, of course, the Eurasian Economic Union Commission, but also there are national authorities. In Russia, we have Ministry of Industry and Trade, Minpromtorg. In Belarus, we have the State Committee of Standardization, Gosstandart, and in Kazakhstan, the Ministry of Industry and Infrastructural Development. So let's look closer at the EAE inventory. Some general information. So why did we name it the EAE inventory? Because there is two steps, and one of the steps is the formation of national inventory by every member country that later on will become the common EAE inventory. However, since not all the countries have started the process of their national inventory formation, it is still unclear when the EAE inventory will become a reality. And at the moment, we have only Russia that has its national inventory open and taken the first step. Belarus is preparing to open, but there's still no date. And unfortunately, there's not much information from other EAEU countries on when they will open the national inventory for nominations. So looking closer at the Russian inventory. So the Russian inventory is the first step in the formation of the common EAEU inventory. Why is this inventory done then? This is first to list chemicals as existing on the Russian market, and all substances with a concentration of more than 0.1% per mass are subject to that inventory. The inventory is free of charge and is a voluntary process. To nominate to the inventory, you need to have an account at GISP, the government's information system for industries. And this account can be created only if you're a Russia-based company, which means that you have to have a registration number as a company in Russia. And the deadline, as mentioned before, will be 1st of August 2020. So which information do you need to submit in order to nominate to the Russian inventory? Please pay attention to the red star. This means that this information is compulsory. So first we have the CAS and the EU numbers. They are very essential, and also the RTCS number if available. However, if, for example, you encounter the situation where there is no CAS number, but there is an EU number or RTCS number, you should provide that. The general rule here is that you should provide as much information as possible on your chemical in order to successfully nominate it to the inventory. Also, the UPAC name in Russian and English are very essential. There are also synonyms in Russian and English. If there are any, please provide them. Structural formula and molecular formula. What concerns the molecular formula, it should be provided in the form of a picture. And amount in tons per year. So if you are a company that is already importing to Russia, then you should state the amount that you've been importing the last year. However, if you only plan to do so, then you can state the approximate amount that you plan to import. And the purpose of use is the general purpose of use for the chemical in its pure state. And some other important information. So chemicals that are subject to another technical regulation are nominated voluntarily. So in this sense, for example, let's say that you have some chemical that is used, that falls under the technical regulation for food products, a food additive. If you want, you can nominate it to this inventory as well. If you, for example, later on plan to sell that chemical as something else and not only as a food additive. But this is, as said, voluntary. Also, the information about polymers is submitted per monomer and all its additives in concentration more than 0.1% per mass. Information on substances that are very complex and you cannot divide them into smaller components should be presented as it is for the substance as a whole. And also there are some exemptions. As said before, those are listed in appendix number 1, but also pesticide formulations. And there are some good news. The latest update is from yesterday. Russia has now published the transitional inventory that is now available for public. This means that you can now access the GISP website and see which substances has been nominated to the Russian inventory so far. And finally, let's look at the scenario. So let's imagine that there is a company exporting chemicals to Belarus and Russia. So should this company notify to the Russian inventory? Yes, it should. It should notify its chemicals. Because as said before, if chemicals are listed in the inventory, the time of the registration, when the registration time will come, will be faster. It will be a notification registration, a simplified procedure which requires less documents. And there is one thing you need to remember, however. Beware of that there is no guarantee that it only will suffice to notify to Russian inventory and not to the Belarus one. Since, as I said, because of the disagreement between the countries, it is a bit difficult to say when the common EAEU inventory will form and even if it will form at all. So therefore, it may happen that you will also have to notify to the Belarus inventory. That's why it's always good to notify to the Russian inventory as in the first place, but also keep in mind that you might still need to notify to the Belarus one or to another country that you are importing to. And here we go with a short summary of what we learned today. So looking first at the TR 41, main requirements are identified in this document and the exemptions are clearly defined. However, we are waiting for the second tier approval of this document with more clarifications and registration dates and penalties, if there are any, and also fees, if there are any. What concerns the EAEU inventory, first step is to form national inventories that then will merge in the second step into one common EU inventory. However, only Russia is now forming its national inventory, and we don't know when exactly the EU inventory will merge into one common inventory. And what concerns the Russian inventory, the deadline is 1st of August 2020. The procedure is free of charge. Only Russia-based companies can notify to the inventory. If you notify a chemical that affects the compliance process, or if your chemical is present in the inventory or not, that affects the compliance process. And also the transitional inventory is now available for public, where you can see whether the chemical you're interested in is already notified to the inventory. Thank you very much. And that's all for me. Now I give the word to Mirash, and I'm also looking forward to see your questions that will be presented later on after the Mirash presentation.